Welcome back to the Wise Up podcast, where we deliver you a weekly dose of business wisdom. I am your host, Chris Albrecht, and I am excited slash nervous slash curious about how this conversation is going to go today. I'm speaking with Miki Johnson, and she's a leadership coach and founder of Leading by Example. And we're going to be talking. I don't know what we're gonna talk about today, because Miki, in her inimitable style, was like, "Hey, all those questions that we had talked about, let's just throw them out the window and see where we go," which I think is great. So we're going to have this conversation, and I think it's very apt because, and I'll start this way, as sort of a lead up, right? But you have a practice that you offer, Miki, called Following Energy Leadership Training, right? So what we're
Mhm.
doing today is kind of following the energy, and not coincidentally, leading by example. So it all comes back together. So, Miki, why don't you tell me what following your energy is and what you offer in your practice?
Yeah, for sure. Well, first off, thank you for rolling with the change. I sort of only realized in in the afterwards of sending you that email a mere hour ago suggesting that we do something different, that I was sort of creating change for us in the moment. So we can study how that might have, we might have had reactions to that or what happened around that. But one of the big things about this leadership training is that it's very experiential, right? It's kind of, I've had some of my clients call it kind of the graduate level leadership, training or class or learning, right? Because I think there's a lot of tactical stuff about being a leader, and there are a million classes and mentors and things that you can take, right, about the kind of how. And what I'm more interested in is the like, how are we being rather than what are we doing as leaders. And a big part of that has to do with like how we are in our bodies, right? Like how we are in our nervous systems, how we're showing up in this very subconscious, intangible way to people, not just the rules that we're putting out and the directives we're giving and the communications that we're making. And so one thing I was wondering if you would be open to is, something about change that I've learned is that change is happening constantly, right? It happens to
Sure.
us all the time, most of the time. So part of what I'm hoping to help people do is to sort of be really conscious in the way that they approach change, so they get to have a little more influence over where it takes them. And so
Mhm.
one thing that's like a very simple thing we can do around change is to just consciously mark a change point, right? And so we could even do that really simply here. And I like to do this when I go into sessions with people a lot, which is to just take a moment to kind of notice that we were somewhere before, right? I was like getting up, I have young kids, I was getting ready for the morning, I was doing yoga, things like that. You, I'm sure, had your own morning thing. And now we're here, we're having a conversation, we're doing a podcast. And so I was going to offer a little way that we could mark this change if you wanted to, just as a starting point.
Well,
Um,
absolutely.
it
Who's going
won't
to turn
hurt,
that down?
I promise. If you want to, you can close your eyes. There's no pressure, but most people find it a little easier to sort of access the place inside if you do that.
Okay.
You can sit however is comfortable for you. It might even take a minute for your body to like find what's comfortable, right? But yeah, if you just close your eyes, and what I like to do is just imagine like a beautiful rain shower is coming down on me, and it is just washing away everything that I was doing before, right? So any nervousness or thoughts I was having about what we'd talk about, or the pressure to get my kids out the door in time, or conversation I had with my husband, or, whatever was going on before, just kind of like one by one, imagine each of those things like kind of dropping off of you, washing away. You're just like letting them go. Um, and then seeing if you notice a little space, right? Seeing if you notice that that opens up some space. Maybe there's even like a breath where you let it out. You might be like my husband, who hates me to tell him to breathe. So like, don't do anything you don't want to do here. But just see if you can find that there's like a little open space now. for us to move into this space, this conversation. And I don't even like to fill that space with anything, because we're trying to be curious here. We're trying to stay in the space of seeing what could happen. But just notice how your body feels, or maybe what's going on in your mind. Maybe you notice your feet on the ground or your back in the chair. But just here in this present moment, now that we've at least hopefully tried to let go some of that stuff that was happening before. And then, when you're ready, you can open your eyes and come back.
Okay, here we are.
Yeah, here we are.
That's great.
So what occurs to you now, Chris? What are you noticing? What are you curious about?
Well, I'm wondering, so I want to get back. What that allowed me to do was I felt it's like a meditation almost brief, where you're sort of checking in, and I could just feel where I was just naturally tense by my own, like, shoulders hunched up. Hey, take a second to relax those. Teeth clenched. Hey, take a second to relax those, right? And having the metaphor of or the visualization of the rain shower, sort of like the pressure of that in a good way. I don't mean like the pressure of visualizing. I just mean like the feeling, the sensation of that really helped just have a moment for sort of clarifying and centering before going into this. So thank you for giving us a space to do that. I think it's interesting the way I'm coming at it, right? When we think of change management, the first thing I think of is sort of, the anxiety is sort of the inability to deal with the ambiguous, right? Is oftentimes, right? Like you can't, it's hard to process things that are beyond your control. And then you in turn try to control the things that you can, and you might do that to an extreme, right? So I am interested in this, just in the concept of change management, as someone who is often sort of anxious and sort of has an inability to change. And I'm wondering, in sort of the clients you deal with, what is sort of the range of, what is their sort of starting point, right? When you go in and talk about, oh, look at that. I didn't mean to do that. That's the thing. For those on the podcast listening and not watching, the Apple gestures just made it go off fireworks and make it look like I was celebrating anxiety. But where do you find most of your clients are at the beginning?
Yeah. Can I take us in a slightly different direction?
Sure.
I love specifics. You and I think, share a background in journalism. And so I always like to have a really specific example, and I could pull from my clients, but, I try to be pretty confidential about what's going on with them. But you were talking about change management and sort of the challenge you've had with change in the past. Like, can you give me an example of a kind of change that has created, ambiguity and therefore anxiety for you?
Oh, I think it's without turning this into a session where I need to lay back on a chaise lounge. So I feel like I live in change. And I think I go so far in the extreme that I actually go around and I prefer things to be in a state of flux versus a sense of stasis. And so I grew up in the military, and so I was used to moving around a lot. And so I just kind of thrive more in like, oh, we're picking up and moving again. Right. So, and as a result, I feel like I want change to be the steady state rather than having a steady state of what most people would consider sort of a steady state. Does that make sense?
So yeah, so change is more comfortable to you,
Yes.
in a certain way. And
Yes.
so, yeah, what's the uncomfortable, like, opposite of that? Like, where do you get uncomfortable because things are not changing? Like, oh, I've had this job for 5 years, like something's wrong, or like things like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Something like that. That's exactly right. That's exactly
Yeah.
right. Or I've been looking at the same four walls for however many years. Time to change, right? Like,
Yeah.
absolutely, those kinds of things, right? Rather than just appreciating, hey, you're in a good spot. There's no reason to uproot and do things other than to uproot and redo things.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Well, what a wonderful place for you to be. at OpenWater, since I know that there are a lot of people sort of like in a state of change that maybe they didn't choose.
Sure.
And you sound like someone who consciously chooses change, and has a lot of comfort with that. Maybe too much comfort, right? Like maybe sometimes, sometimes it's a place we go that we don't have to. Yeah, so I think that let's see, what do I want to say about that? And also sort of why people come to me or the kind of change that I see people in. Well, one of the things I was thinking about coming into this conversation is the difference between what I'm going to call change and transformation.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm kind of just picking these words to talk about two different versions of this thing, right? And so what I'd like to call change is more something that happens to us, right? Something that is we're kind of passive in, right?
Okay.
And it's interesting because like it probably started out that way for you as a kid, right? Like you didn't have a choice of where your parents decided to take you. But then it like inevitably the things that happen to us as a kid, we get integrated and then we like consciously create those, right, as adults. But let's say change is something that more kind of happens to us, or maybe we create it, but we don't realize we're creating it, right, subconsciously or from habituated state. And then to me, transformation, which is what I am hopefully helping my clients do, or what I like to explore myself, is something that's very conscious, where we recognize a need, right? We recognize like something that's the way I'm doing this now isn't working anymore, or my job isn't feeling fulfilling in the way that I want it to, right? And I think helping people move from a state of feeling like change is just happening to them and they're sort of like fighting it, right? Or they're like stuck in it and they can't get out of it. Helping people move into a place where they feel like they're making choices that are creating the kind of transformation that they want, right? So transform, um, right, it's like two Latin words that it comes from. Trans means across or going from one side to the other, right? And form is like the way something appears or it is or it exists. And so we're literally crossing from one form to another, right? The form of something is changing. And there's a huge difference doing that consciously versus unconsciously. Um, and I would say that most of the anxiety, stress, worry, fights that we have in our lives, I notice, comes from when things are changing and we're just not being conscious about it. I'll give you a very small example from my life, which is that my husband was in between jobs for quite a while last year. I was the main breadwinner with my coaching business. And then a couple of months ago, he got a job that is full time. It's much more like in an office. It's not as flexible as my work, right? And so we had agreed when he wasn't working that like he would do a lot more of the housework. He would like do the dishes and he would get the kids more often in the morning and things like that. It was very important for me to be able to focus on the business. And then there was this period where he like was working part-time, but he wasn't on a full-time contract yet, right? And we started to have like we started to rub up against each other about like housework, right? I mean, like classic, typical thing, right? But what was happening was that his like space for that work had changed, and neither one of us had really like noticed it, right? It was like, oh, he actually like needs to be on calls on a regular basis and he needs to be like heads down in the evening and like these other things. And so for us to just consciously take a minute and be like, hold on, like what's going on? You're working a little more, like you're bringing in some money, so maybe I don't have to work quite as much. Would it help you if like I did the dishes 3 nights a week instead of you having them all 5? Or if I did like part of them in the morning when I get the boys, or whatever. Like, what do we need here to make this change in form conscious and like work for us rather than something that we feel like is kind of like throwing us off? And so in a lot of ways, I just help people do that, but like other really big things, right? Like I
Right.
sit with a lot of clients that are between jobs or they want to change jobs. I often call coaching, I think all of it, but especially the kind I do, sort of the like, do I stay or do I go? right? All of it is like those big questions of like where I live, I'm in a relationship, I'm in a job, like, do I keep doing this thing or do I try something different that I don't know what's going to happen?
Got it. So what are most of your clientele? Are you doing stuff for corporate business partners? Are you doing stuff for individuals who are looking, who are in the midst of transformation, or where does that, I'm curious because that
Yeah.
will lead into my next question,
Sure. I
potentially.
mostly work with individuals right now. I'm open to working with teams, but I'm only interested in working with teams where I already have a pretty close relationship with the leader. I
Okay.
ran an employer branding agency with my husband for 8 years in the Bay Area, and I did pretty much all of our sales and led most of the client engagements. And one of the things I really learned from that process is I really hate corporate sales. I really hate like selling into one person, but they're not actually the decision maker. And so then I have to go sell to a different person who has a totally different set of like needs and expectations and values. And then there's 12 people involved, and any one of them can blow the thing up, and it takes 8 months to get a contract done. And so I really like where it's just like you and me, and we decide if it works, and you write me a check and we go, right? But the other thing that was really frustrating about doing, consulting work inside of organizations is that we would come in and we would work usually with a talent team or a people team or something like that. And then inevitably there would be a hiring manager or there'd be a CEO or something like that. Not always, but some of the time, who would essentially come in and just blow the whole thing up at the last minute.
Yeah.
And so I'm really only interested in working very top down with teams and organizations, because also like as a leader myself, of my own organization, I saw that like, yes, there's absolutely change that can happen ground up. But if the leader at the top is doing unconscious things that are sabotaging the work of the rest of the team, like you have to start there to really fix things and make them better. So the short answer to in a very long way is that I pretty much only work with individuals right now.
Got it. All right. So I'm curious, you've felt following energy
Mhm.
leadership training, right?
Yeah.
What or whose energy are people following?
That's a great question. I love that. So when we talk about energy, in this context, we're first off just recognizing that like we run on electricity, right? Like our brains and bodies run on electricity. There's pretty good scientific research out there that says that you can notice like other bodies in a room at like quite a distance. I think we've all had that experience, right? Of just like walking into a room and being like, oh, like what is going on in here, right? Like something feels off. Or
Yeah.
being in a room where you're like, this is amazing. Like everyone is like so engaged and like everything's awesome and like I want to do more of this, right? So obviously humans are very like energetic, sort of electric beings, and we can feel that and notice that. And then, all the living things around us are also breathing and, have energy inside of them. And then we know that like, I don't know, the stars and the planets all, we're all made kind of the same thing. We're magnetic, we're like all these things. So, um, when we talk about following energy, we're really talking about following the energy of everything inside of us and everything around us. And so some of the tangible ways that we can talk about that are first and foremost, like I sort of did at the beginning, we spend a lot of time just practicing getting in touch with the energy of our bodies, because our bodies, right, which include our brains and what we think of as our minds, are all just one thing. Our brain is just an organ, like our heart or our stomach or anything else. And there's a huge amount of information coming in from that whole system all the time. And in our society, we've by and large been taught to only pay attention to this very small amount of information, which is what we think of as thought, right? Or like what's going on. We think of it as happening up here, but really a lot of it's happening down here too. So first of all, we want to get in touch with the energy of like our whole physical system, right? Because that gives us a lot more information. I often talk about it like we are trying to use like sort of a dime store calculator when we could have access to this whole supercomputer, right? Of like data and computing. So first I'm helping people get in touch with that. And then there's the energy of the communities that we're part of, the groups that we're part of. So definitely like there's energy, I'm sure, within a team that you're on, or an organization that you're within, or a community group that you're part of, or a religious group that you're part of. The energy of like my family, right? And like what's going on with that, and all the sort of interactions and feelings people are having and stuff like that. And then obviously there's like a larger energetic context, right? There's sort of this crazy collective that we are hyper tapped into all the time, of like what's going on across the world, what's going on in our governmental system, what's going on with our climate, like all those things. And basically, rather than feeling like those are some kind of like random thing, again, that we're sort of being buffeted by, that we have to like react to or like feel good or bad about, to sort of see it as like, what if this was all a big learning environment that was perfectly designed for me to transform into like whatever the next thing is for me. And so what if I noticed it that way and I was curious that way, right? So like if I'm thinking about something and then a song comes on the radio that has that exact phrase in it that's been running through my mind for a week, right? I might notice that. Or I might notice like my husband is grumpy and be like, all right, like what's going on there, right? Or I might notice that we get on a group call with my team and everybody just seems down, and I ask what's going on, and people are really stressed out about Israel and Palestine, and they don't know how to think about it and deal with it, right? So that's all energy, that's all information, that's all data that I can take in to help me make decisions about just like where I want to go next, right? What the next step is.
Okay, a thought occurred to me as we were talking here, which
Please.
is there is a natural contradiction in having a
Mm.
website called Leading by Example
Ha!
and a program called Following Energy, right?
Mm.
You are saying, right, that we're talking about transformation. How does that work when you lead by example, but you're a leader and a follower at the same time? What does that mean to you?
Yeah. Oh, what a great question. Thank you, Chris. I love that. Nobody's ever specifically brought that up to me. So what I think is super interesting about that question is that embedded within that is an idea we have about what leadership means, right?
Mhm.
Which is that leadership means that I am in front of something. Leadership means that I am making decisions. I am blazing the trail, right? I am setting the tone. And so I think part of what following energy leadership is about is that leadership can also look like um, showing up and serving the needs of the thing that I have said I am leading, right? Or I am, so really like a service leadership is like one way to talk about it.
Mhm.
And so like very literally when I was leading my team at Job Portraits, which is the agency we had before, um, what I learned to do through my own work with my mentor, who taught me following energy, Stacy Bowden, was rather than to be like, in order for this thing to succeed, my husband and I, we're the founders. We have to make a bunch of decisions. We have to like create this thing out of whole cloth, right? We have to like forcefully, sort of push and mold this thing. And instead to say, there's this thing in the world called job portraits. Like it exists. People want it, they pay for it. We eventually have, employees that get drawn to it. And we literally, I don't have it here, I have it in my other room, but we literally have a little like totem that we created that's like, this is job portraits, right? It's not us. I think it's a really big thing that a lot of founders and solopreneurs do is like, my business is me, right? And if you don't like
Mhm.
it, you don't want to buy it, it means I'm a bad person, I'm doing something wrong. It's really important. It was like, this is job portraits. And so the practice is not, what do we think we need to do to like make this thing happen? It's like, what does job portraits need? Like, what are we hearing from our clients, from the employees, from our own intuition, from our own desires, from the marketplace about like what's needed here? And then we follow that. And so for me, leading by example is me showing up and doing that version of leadership so that people can actually see it and feel it. Because that's the other problem with really, I think, everything that we do in our lives to a certain degree, but like how we are with people and kind of the energy they get from us, but especially as leaders, it makes way more of a difference than sort of like what we say or what our strategy is, right? Or what our plan is. And so that's why I call it leading by example, because I saw a really long time ago that when I actually changed or I did something different in my life, it wasn't because someone told me to do it. It was because I saw someone who I really respected and they had a life that looked more like what I wanted. And they were doing this thing. And I was like, huh, like, I wonder if I did that thing, if I would get more to that place that I wanted to go, you know?
Hmm.
And so in my experience, I honestly believe that no one does anything that we tell them to do. They only do what they see us doing because it like resonates and it's something that they feel a pull to want to do themselves.
Well, I can definitely vouch my 13-year-old does not do what I tell him to do. So,
We
that
all have a teenager inside of us, Chris.
I have a teenager outside of us, outside of me. And he's definitely one that yeah. Anyway, but all right. So one of the things I'm curious about is as you put on these workshops and as you work with different clients, how are you creating a sense of belonging?
Hmm, that's an interesting question. Um,
So let me rephrase it a different way.
mhm,
How do you overcome the skeptic
mm,
and make them
mm,
feel like they are bought in and part of and feel like they belong in the session you are creating and that they are getting
mm,
value out of it?
mm. Man, that is such an interesting question. I'm going to answer it two ways because part of our practice in following energy is also to be in kind of the both and to
Sure.
try to step out of the idea that, you know, this world is either or. Um, the first part of that question is, or my answer to that question is that I trust that everyone's transformation will come to them in the format that works for them. And so I recognize that following energy is not a format that works for everyone, right? Like it is a path of transformation. It's not the path of transformation. So I first off, again, I think this is leading by example. I try to be really clear, like who I am and what I am not. And if how I'm showing up and what I'm offering is like so uncomfortable for you that you're like, I'm just going to be in resistance the whole time. There's no way I'm going to get value out of this. Then like, go do something else, please. Like whatever that thing is for you, I have complete trust that like you will get where you need to be in that way, right? Um, but if there's something inside of you that is curious, you might still feel uncomfortable or a little scared or unsure or like any of those things. But if there's like a little thing inside of you that's like, oh no, that sounds kind of interesting. Like maybe I want to check it out. Then if people feel that much of a call that they're willing to come and give their time and energy and sometimes, you know, money to be with me and work with me, um, then it is really important to me that everyone in that room be able to lead by example, right? Like be able to show up and we get to experience their leadership, whatever is real for them and important. And I will give you a couple of things, but the biggest thing I'll say is that again, it's a feeling, right? And I follow the energy and I see what's needed in the moment. But a big part of it is that like my training is really actually as a facilitator, much more than as a coach. And so I really love creating spaces for people to have transformative experiences. I don't know if they will or not, but I can create a space I think might, right, make space for that. Yeah, one of the ways is really clear expectations, really clear boundaries. I'm pretty big on time and being on time and telling people how much time things are going to take and if we're going to need more of it and getting permission for that. Telling people what's going to be expected of them and what's not, and that they can opt in or out when they want to. And I'm a really big fan of just like hearing everyone's voice, creating space for everyone to share in whatever way or depth or format works for them, but that when we explain to others what's going on, we actually encode it, right, and deepen it into our own experience. So I think it's important for people to share. Again, even if that's just like in chat or if that's like a writing assignment where they have a chance to think and then maybe they share one or two words from it or something like that.
All right. Well, I would be remiss if we didn't mention that you are doing an introductory boot camp for us on OpenWater, right? This is something that's available to our members, and it's called From Control to Curiosity, a transformational shift for approaching change. So we've talked a lot about it, a lot of different things here today, but transformation has certainly been at the heart of it. What is something people who attend this boot camp, what's just like one thing that they're going to be able to get from your facilitation?
Yeah. Well, again, I can't promise anything, but my intention is to create a space where there's an opportunity to feel um, a release of any anxiety around not knowing what's next, which is really like the heart of change, right? Like you said at the beginning, what's hard about change is like we just don't know what it's going to look like on the other side of that transformation. And that instead what they can rest into is a sense of trust, a sense of play, and a sense of curiosity instead about where things are going to go.
Excellent. Miki Johnson, you are the founder of Leading by Example, and you are a leadership coach, and you help people follow the energy and leadership training. Thank you so much for being on the show today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for rolling with the changes, Chris, and showing up too. I
Yeah,
appreciate
this
it.
is fun. This is a good time.